Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. The Albanese government increased its lead for a second straight week. On a two-party preferred basis, the ALP's up 1.5% to 53.5%, ahead of the coalition on 46.5%. This level of support for the Albanese government on a two-party preferred basis is the highest it's been since the first week of March, and is due to an increase in primary support for the Greens and the flow of preferences back to the ALP. If a federal election were held now, the ALP would be re-elected with an increased majority, the latest Roy Morgan survey shows. For the second straight week, the three major states of New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland all swung to the ALP on a two-party preferred basis. The Albanese government now leads clearly in New South Wales, 56% to 44%, in Victoria, 57.5% to 42.5%, and has narrowed the gap in Queensland, where they have 47% of the vote compared to 53%. Coming back now to primary voting intention, this week primary support for both major parties was down slightly. The ALP was down 0.5% to 30.5%, while support for the coalition was down 1% to 35%. Support for the Greens, on the other hand, was up 1.5% to 15.5%, and support for One Nation increased 1% to 5.5%, while support for other parties was down 1.5% to 4%, and independent support was up 0.5% to 9.5%. So although the news on the political front was positive, at least on a two-party preferred basis, there were some concerning moves for the government in the key indicators. Roy Morgan government confidence dropped to its lowest level so far this year. It was down 5.5 points to 70, with an increasing majority of Australians saying the country's heading in the wrong direction. Now, 58.5% of Australians say the wrong direction. Only 28.5% say the country's heading in the right direction. As a result, Roy Morgan government confidence remains 30 points below the neutral level of 100. There was also a big plunge in consumer confidence. ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence this week was down 3.5 points to only 77. This drop is not an unusual result, though, for the first week of winter. Consumer confidence has dropped by an average of 4.4 points this week over the last 3 years. Now, looking longer term, consumer confidence has now spent a record 71 weeks below the level of 85. Driving the drop in consumer confidence were increasing concerns about the next 12 months, both for personal finances and the Australian economy. Both indicators hit their lowest levels for 2024 this week, with 9% more Australians expecting to be worse off than better off financially this time next year, and 32% more Australians expecting bad times than good times for the Australian economy over the next year. In fact, only 7% of Australians expect good times for the Australian economy over the next year. This is the lowest since mid-November 2023, just after the Reserve Bank last raised interest rates. There's a slight drop in inflation expectations this week, down from 5% to 4.8%. So Australians now expect annual inflation to be 4.8% over the next 2 years. Inflation expectations have stayed within a narrow band of about 4.8% to 5.3% for 27 weeks, more than half a year. And finally this week to the Australian employment market. And there's good news with the labour force in May. Employment in Australia reached an all-time high. 14.3 million Australians in employment is a new record. It's 78,000 more than in April and 603,000 more than a year ago. And importantly, this surge in employment is having an impact on unemployment. The latest Roy Morgan headline real unemployment figure for May is down 1% to 8.7%. That's equivalent to 1.36 million Australians. As well as unemployed, there are also 1.34 million people who are underemployed. That's 8.5% of the workforce. There's good news on this front as well. Underemployment dropped 256,000 from April to the lowest rate in 2 years. So the overall figures show total unemployment and underemployment, what we generally call workforce underutilisation, was 17.2% of the workforce in May, or 2.7 million people. This is the lowest level of labour underutilisation we've seen in the Australian workforce for over a year, since April 2023. There are several factors impacting the Australian labour force. The largest, of course, is surging population growth. As we've said throughout the last year, the monthly movements are within a broader context of this rapidly increasing population and workforce. So Australia's population aged 14 plus, largely the working age population, increased by a near record 739,000 compared to a year ago, to nearly 22.6 million. And our workforce is now up to almost 15.7 million, up 710,000 from just a year ago. So on one hand, this means more Australians are employed. Now 14.3 million Australians are employed. That's 603,000 more than a year ago. And most of these new jobs are in full-time employment. That's up 598,000, while there are 5,000 more in part-time employment. On the other hand, the downside of the surging population is that not everyone joining the workforce is able to find gainful employment. And more Australians are unemployed year on year. Year on year, unemployment's up 107,000 to 1.36 million. And that's a wrap. Thanks for your interest this week in Roy Morgan's latest results, and I'll be back next week to bring you the most up-to-date readings on consumer confidence, inflation expectations, voting intentions, and we'll be looking at business confidence. See you then.